Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here today. We have a stellar panel again to discuss a very important topic. Let me just hand it over to Ms. Sunita Reddy, Director of Chennai International Center. She's also the Managing Director of Apollo Hospitals, to welcome the panelists and begin the session. Over to you, Sunita.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Such a pleasure to be with you this evening, this Friday evening, with such an eminent panel. Let me start by saying, I was always fascinated by this picture of a baby in the Time magazine. They said that this baby would live to be 142 years old. And I kept wondering, how is this going to happen? And how do we move the conversation from just lifespan to health span? And I think through this journey of understanding good health, probably from where I come from, which is from a hospital background, we've always looked at preventive care. We've looked at how can we reverse heart disease. We've looked at how we can reverse diabetes or maintain condition management for diabetes, how we can keep your bones healthy. Of late, we've started to look at the impact of the gut on how we think and what we become. But more interestingly, as the world changes, today we have about 750 million people over 65 years old. And as we move into 2050, we will have 1.5 billion people. And as we start to focus on this feature of having a healthy lifestyle, a joyous lifestyle, I'm so privileged to have with me this wonderful panel today. So it is my privilege to introduce Professor Eve Ogelforst, Professor of Psychology at Loughborough University, UK. She did her PhD in the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands on the modeling of age-related cognitive decline. She has a deep interest in early dementia screening and treatment and has set up collaborations with Oxford and London and multiple partners across China, Indonesia, India, and Australia. She also works on exercise and nutritional programs to improve cognitive function. She has written over 200 peer-reviewed books, and she is on the editorial board of the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease and the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease and Parkinsonism. Professor Linda Lam is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She has been president of the Hong Kong College of Psychiatrists, as well as a past editor of the Eastern Asia Archives of Psychiatrists. She is the founding president of the Chinese Dementia Research Association. Her research interests include detriments of healthy aging and early detection and intervention of dementia. Dr. Srinivas Krishnamurthy, FRCP, is a noted neuropsychiatrist who is from Chennai. So he is very much part of the Indian healthcare system and is renowned for what he does. He is the founder and director of NeuroKrish, the neuropsychiatry center which provides in-depth analysis for patient care and rehabilitation of people with disorders of the brain and mind. He also founded TriMed, an enterprise which specializes in integrative medical specialties, bringing modern healthcare and ancient wisdom. Fortunately, he is based in Chennai, India. He was president of the International Neuropsychiatric Association from 2018 to 2020. He is the recipient of the President's Medal of the Royal College of Psychiatrists for his contributions to the community in neuropsychiatry. He was the first Indian psychiatrist to be elected to the Fellow of all three Royal Colleges of Physicians in the UK, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and London. With this, let me leave you with this closing remark from an 80-year-old Harvard longitudinal study, which said about aging, which Harvard said was, good genes are nice, but joy is better. So with this eminent panel, let's find the joy in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita ji, for that wonderful introduction and bringing us all together to do this program. And I'd like to also thank Mrs. Neena Kutari for inviting us to do this as a prime mover of the CIC on health. And thank you to Vanita, who's put it together. Today's discussion is contextualized around the whole area of population aging. And if you look at the United Nations report on population aging, in 2019, the elders will go from were 1 in 11 people. By 2050, it's going to be 1 in 6 people. In Sweden, which we know is quite advanced in the way it manages its healthcare, in 1890, people lived less than 50 years. And if you look at what happened by the time 1965, 1 in 5 lived over 65 years. And now, today, 1 in 4 people live beyond 65 years. And by 2050, that's probably going to be 1 in 3. And therefore, we have a population of people who are living longer. And population aging is therefore becoming more and more nuanced. There are changes in mortality risks, there are changes in health status, there are changes in type and level of activity, in productivity, and we have changes in living arrangements as well as populations age. And in India, we have something very unique. We have what's called the PICA syndrome, the parents in India, children abroad syndrome, where you have elders living here alone, and all their kids live abroad in the US or Australia or the UK or somewhere in Europe. In fact, after this meeting, I have a conference call with 3 children of a man with dementia we are looking after here. And they are in 3 different parts of the world. So that's very unique to India as well. And of course, population aging is fastest in some of the developing countries. So East Asia and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and now South Asia, countries like India is fast catching up, have got an increasing burden of an aging population. And this is not just health. We have, socioeconomic consequences as well to keep in mind as population ages. So we are thinking, therefore, about, what happens to people with diabetes as they age, hypertension as they age, obesity as they age, depression as they age. And what about the normals who don't have too many problems? What happens to them as they age? So our focus today in today's discussion is brain and mind health. And we are very privileged to have 2 very experienced researchers and clinicians who are working in this area, Professor Hogewast and Professor Lam, in 2 different parts of the world. And we're going to talk to them about brain aging and mental health and what we can do in order to age well and prevent the problems that we expect might happen to at least some of us as we age. So welcome, Eve, welcome, Linda. It's a wonderful privilege to have you here virtually in Chennai, if not really in Chennai. I wanted to start by addressing with you, Linda, the biological perspective. What happens to the brain as you age? What are the changes we see?
Okay, so thank you, Krish, and thank you, the organizers, for giving me this chance to share my views. Maybe perhaps addressing Krish's questions, let us have a very simple view of our brain. Broadly, the brain is composed of nerve cells and the supporting structures, which include the blood vessels, which gives nutrients and oxygen to our brain cells. With advancing age, the neurons and the supporting structures may degenerate and die, leading to a shrinkage of the brain structures. Degenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, as they are well known to most of us, causes accelerated nerve cell deaths. But very importantly as well, the cerebrovascular diseases, the problems in the blood vessels, especially the small vessel disease, may lead to earlier degeneration of brain cells. With that, the neuroimaging studies, very advanced neuroimaging studies, actually could demonstrate that the brain shrinks and the volumes of brain diminish with these diseases. But we have to note that not everybody have a degenerative brain, because we can find that in some people who are of advanced old age, they function very well and the brain may not degenerate as much as what we expected. And sometimes if we just look at the imaging, the brain structures in the films, they appear to shrink a lot, but then the person actually function quite well. These are the interesting things that we can think about. How do our brain survive with aging and survive with degeneration?
Wonderful. So brains shrink. There is the neurons may get destroyed. There is poor blood supply, but it's not necessarily correlating with functionality. That when you do a scan, and even if you see shrinkage, you have a person who can be supremely functional. And of course, not all brains do badly, which is the good news. Some do better than others.
Yes.
Which brings me to the question, Eve, what happens to the body-mind perspective? What happens to us as we get older?
I would like to also thank the organizers and you, Krish, for all your kind words and allowing me to participate. I concur with what Dr. Lam said earlier, is that one of the most interesting things in aging is how the variability increases. So that some people age very successfully, and we do a lot of cohort studies. We've done a lot of cohort studies in Cambridge and in Oxford, showing that some of these very old people perform much better than their younger counterparts. And on the other hand, we see, of course, the other end of the spectrum with the pathologies, with the diseases Dr. Linda mentioned, such as the Alzheimer's disease, the vascular dementias, where there is a very clear role of disease accelerating that decline. I think what's of interest as a biological psychologist is to look at what's retained rather than what's lost. So, for instance, even in many of the dementias, Alzheimer's disease in particular, one of the most common dementias, we can see that semantic knowledge is often retained for a very long period of time. And that semantic knowledge is the things we know about, we can talk about to people. And also the personal history, if we go back far enough, we can still relate to people. And I think it's very important. We're currently designing specialist dementia facilities for people with dementia. And one of the most important things is to allow family members, the community, to come in and make sure that people are surrounded by love, attention, have meaning, dignity. And that really impacts on the body, I think, to a large extent, where we see that people, if they're by themselves and lonely and don't have meaning in their life anymore, we see there's quite an acceleration of that cognitive decline, of the mood, etc. So staying connected, I think, is very important as we age.
And therefore, a healthy body might be as much about socialization and activity rather than just physical fitness and age.
It's not just what we do for our bodies, it's also how we connect, how we take care of our hearts. But we'll talk about that more in a bit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Linda, most of us worry about losing our cognitive and mental faculties as we get older. So people do tend to slow down a bit, and people do find it difficult sometimes to recall information and so on. How does our cognition and brain health change as we age? What happens?
Okay, so I probably would echo what Eve mentioned just a minute ago. And cognitive function are not a single entity. Different cognitive functions interact and actually complement with each other to serve our mental faculties as a whole, how we function in the world, in the society. As we age, some of our abilities may thrive less effectively and less efficiently. For example, the speed of thinking, the response, the motor function, reaction time generally slow down a bit as we age. Age does not mean it's 65, and actually these things start to slow down at late 30s or even early 30s. We may also notice that we have difficulty remembering exact things, hard facts when we get older. The attention function and the memory seems to be less competitive when we compare ourselves when we are old. When we are young, with years pass by, we seem to be less effective than before. But it does not mean that overall function necessarily decline. On the other hand, because most of us actually accumulated experiences throughout our life, and we got more knowledge about things, and we are able to select and prioritize based on our experience. So problem-solving skills, language and knowledge are better preserved, as what Eve have just mentioned before. And when we grow in age, especially if we don't have major degenerative diseases, not in the disease spectrum, some older adults actually find themselves wiser in terms of decision-making and judgment. Wisdom grows with age, but the speed may be a little bit less when we get older. So long as we maintain that our brain are not affected by major degenerative diseases, perhaps we have something to gain when we get older.
So in a sense, we might slow down in some ways, but we actually might become sharper in some ways as we get older.
Yeah.
And better at doing certain things.
Yes.
Thank you. And what about the body-mind perspective? What changes?
Body-mind perspective, I think we used to think about mental health, like we think about mental health perspective. Most people would think when you get older, your mental well-being may decline. And because we know that there are higher chance for old people suffer from depression and anxiety. And but if we don't suffer from too much depression and anxiety, if you look at the older adults with no prominent mental health problems, they actually have better mental well-being. We've asked them how satisfied are their life. We see that there is an increasing, if it's rating scale across the lifespan, normal older adults actually are more satisfied with their life. And they find a meaning in life more easily than people who are young. Perhaps after so many years of experience, you get to learn how to adapt to your lifestyles, adapt to your life, and able to appreciate and find little things that make you satisfied. So the mind perspective is that if we are mentally unwell, suffer from mental illness, perhaps this is a disease, this is entity we need to handle, we need to manage. But for a majority, we're able to protect ourselves against these diseases. Most of us would find some way to adapt to our life better.
So our potential for contentment and life satisfaction actually goes up as we get older.
That's a bit counterintuitive, but that's what we find from studies and scientific evidence.
Thank you. If assuming that cognitive changes and to some extent decline are inevitable in some ways for most of us, what does science tell us about who is vulnerable for that? Who's at risk?
Well, there are, of course, genes. I think everybody knows somebody who's got these amazing parents who are very healthy, and you know, my father-in-law is 90 and he's sharp as anything and he's got a great memory, and then there are people, of course, who age less well, and that can to some extent be determined by their genetics. Now, what's luckily enough, of course, very rare is a very early onset of dementia. We call that pre-senile dementia of the Alzheimer's type, where if your parents or one of your parents has had dementia before the age of 65 of that Alzheimer's type, you're very much more at risk. However, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. It just means your risk is increased. The other thing we should remember about the genes is that if we have the genes, so if your parents have had dementia after the age of 65 of the Alzheimer's type, which is slow, gradual change in memory and other cognitive functions which impact on your daily life, your risk might be increased. You might carry those genes, but again, it doesn't mean you're going to get it. So we then get to the more interesting things about protecting ourselves against dementia. And years ago, we coined the phrase, what is good for your heart is good for your brain. So we know a lot about what's good for our heart. I think public health messages have been really successful at this in bringing home that we need to stay in shape, we need to exercise, we need to look after our blood pressures, we need to look after our cholesterols, and I think we'll talk more about that in a little while. But so that is what we can do about it. So there's the genes, there are these lifestyle factors, and there are perhaps some environmental factors that we're not entirely sure about yet, such as pollution, which seems to be playing quite an important role in the development of dementia. And I think that's something we really urgently need to address from a government perspective.
Thank you. So there is both kind of, what shall I say, what you're endowed with, which you can do nothing about, or you cannot do too much to change, but you can work on it, and your own lifestyle, which you do have a handle on, and the prevention of lifestyle conditions, which we'll talk about in a very short while. Thank you. Linda, you've done a lot of work about preserving brain function and cognition, especially starting with people who are showing early changes of decline. Can you please share with us what you have learned through this body of work that you've been doing?
Thank you, Chris, for your interesting questions. My interest is to explore different ways that optimize brain function, especially when in the context of early decline. Because we know from a lot of scientific observations, a lot of studies, that there are actually compensatory mechanisms. Even when a brain is injured, when a brain degenerates, it seems that there is at least a phase which our brains can compensate a lot. So preserving the brain function is very important. What Eve just mentioned, especially preserving your blood vessels through controlling your physical health, diabetes, blood pressure, hypertension, everything are important determinants to maintain a blood vessel. If you have a good heart, there are high chance that you have a good brain. And this is very, very important. In a recent study in Hong Kong for the Chinese older adults, we actually found that almost 80% of people with mild cognitive impairment have small infarcts. And also white matter ischemic changes is much higher than we originally expect. So this rings an alarm that we have to take care of vascular health. Other habits such as smoking, drinking, we also found that they are not very conducive to brain health if consumed in excess. My previous studies actually focus a bit on how cognitive stimulation and physical exercise may help to boost the cognitive function, because we have an hypothesis that if we stimulate our brain cells through different means, the neural patterns actually that maintains our neural brain functions would be better consolidated. The old saying that use it or lose it. So really we believe that if we use it well, then it actually would preserve for a longer period of time. We did some study on physical exercise, and we did some study on cognitive stimulating exercise, and we found evidence that these exercises practiced regularly actually would have a chance that they maintain cognitive function. But the other thing is that we observe is if we stop doing these activities, after a while, the cognitive function may revert to the normal degenerative paths. That's why we have to maintain and practice regularly. But of course, personal interests would make a great difference. So motivating people to have positive lifestyle is one of the most important factors that we probably need to look at, especially from a public health perspective.
Thank you. So if I were to sort of say the most important points that your research is showing, one is that good heart health translates to good brain health, which means, good lifestyle, control of blood pressure, and of course, moderation in all that you do, which is also your smoking, which I think is a big no-no anyway, and moderation in alcohol. And what you're also pointing out is that physical activity is extremely important, but it has to be sustained. And if you stop doing your physical activity, you are likely to experience a decline in your brain health as well. So you're encouraging all of us to stay active at a sustainable level at all times,
Sure.
if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
Thank you. If you've been researching lifestyle factors and how they contribute to declining brain function, can you please share what you've been learning from all the research that you're doing?
So we've done several cohort studies in China, UK, lots in Indonesia, and the UK also in several cohorts. And as Linda said, lifelong education is very important to create a cognitive reserve, which helps us to cope with issues, perhaps which buffers the damage done by disease. And then there are, of course, smoking that halves your risk, and staying active. We found that the more people stay active, the better that is. And it doesn't just have to be sports. I mean, we found, yes, of course, engaging in sports is very good. It really reduces your risk. But we shouldn't underestimate the numbers of kilocalories expelled when we go shopping and we carry our shopping home, when we get off the bus a little bit earlier, or we park away a bit further and we walk. It doesn't necessarily always have to involve going to the gym. Doing mopping or washing the windows also counts towards your physical activity. One of the most important things we found, my PhDs found, looking at what stops people from exercising, is that people don't enjoy it. So one of the most important things, I think, is to find something you really enjoy. And in our latest studies in Indonesia, using the active aging index modeling, we found that engaging in community activities where you're part of a team and you're engaging in the exercises which are provided by these community centers is really beneficial in preventing dementia, but also frailty in people. What we also found is that once people have developed dementia, if they stay active physically and engaged in these community activities, they have less risk of a fast decline. So even after people have had dementia, a lot of people who take care of people with dementia say, well, we don't have time, you know, it's so onerous. But actually trying to get people to go out and engage in these activities is so beneficial, and it's really worth it. I know it's really difficult because it's very exhausting for carers, but I'd really recommend it. We've worked with exercises which we have available on our website. It's called Couch Potatoes for Cognition, and these involve resistance bands, and just doing them 20 minutes a day, a couple of times a week, was found to really improve memory function in people with dementia. But it also improved their mood, and it made them feel that they could do something, that they had a sense of control, of improving their strength. So that's very important. the last aspect, of course, related to nutrition is something we've looked at a lot. But I think unlike exercise, it's something that you need to do before you've developed dementia. We have not found a lot of evidence that once people have developed dementia, that nutritional supplements or changing the diet is going to reduce that decline a lot. I think, of course, having a healthy diet is good. It makes you feel better. It's good for your overall health. But the message there that's very important is for nutrition, and that also goes for exercise, of course, the earlier you start, the better it is. And when I'm talking early, I mean really early. I'm thinking prenatal early, where we make sure that moms have a good diet, children have a good diet full of folate, B12, etc., to allow the brain to stay intact and to grow good connections.
Fantastic.
Have dementia, not so much. Yes.
In particular, I like the point about, even if you're a couch potato, find something that you like doing,
yes,
and make that your activity. And I think that that is something that all of us can take away. And I think this whole idea of doing that as socially with a group, so you are encouraged to do it and you don't feel it's activity. And the other point I'd like to take away from what you said is that even what you do like housework is activity. So, I'm sure that when I go home, my wife is going to offer me the broom for having said this. But I think that physical activity is everything that we do in terms of moving around and staying active. It's not just going to the gym and going for a jog.
Like gardening, gardening, creation, digging holes, planting. It's very physically demanding and a lot of fun. It's very rewarding.
Yeah. So it can be in pleasurable work. It doesn't have to be just focused physical activity that we do as exercise. I think that's a very important takeaway point for all of us. I'm going to touch a little bit on culture here, because I think we have some parallels between Chinese culture and Indian culture. And ask you, Linda, what about games like mahjong and mind-body activities like Tai Chi and yoga? How are these helpful, what we know?
I think Asian culture is very enriched with spiritually guided pursuit for mental wellness and mental balance of different everything. So I have to declare my conflict of interest as what Chris knows. I am a lover. I love yoga and have been doing yoga for over 10 years, although not doing very well in both physical and non-physical part, but still I love it. From a perspective of how I think that from a scientific perspective, for my body practices like yoga and Tai Chi, I think the coordination of the complex movement, especially with breathing techniques, is a very high level neural stimulation. Imagine that when you are practicing sun salutation or moving in a Tai Chi sequence, you need to solicit different parts of your brain, from preparation, your frontal lobe, language. A lot of sun salutation refers to different posturing, like animals, and then also everything in a coordinated way. So it's a very hard neural stimulation procedure. So I would term that is a kind of cognitive stimulation. But interestingly, because it's so these complex motor movements are associated with breathing, and we actively seek a sense of calmness through these practices. So the emphasis on mental serenity in both practices has good evidence to suggest that they may influence our body immune system. And we know that neuroinflammation are actually part of the risks or perpetuating factors for brain degeneration. So I really think that a regular pursuit, a regular practice of mind-body exercise are important for our physical and brain health. Mahjong is one of the most well-known Chinese game activities that most people would know a little bit. It's an enjoyable group-based cognitive activity. It probably, when you are playing Mahjong for a couple of hours, probably lights up most of your neural network. But something even more important is that for a Mahjong lover, when they play the game, they are very happy. And it reinforces a sense of pleasure. You feel happy, mental well-being, and especially in a social context. I have seen many of patients who are suffering from moderate dementia. They are not very interested in the external environment except when they are having the weekly Mahjong game. And the relatives think that they become much brighter and much happier during the Mahjong and at least a couple of hours one day after the Mahjong. So I think it's cognitively stimulating, but the social context, the abilities to interact with old friends are equally important.
Thank you. And I think that that point about while mind-body exercises like Tai Chi and yoga may not seem terribly energetic, they actually are very strong neurostimulators because they invite you to pay attention, to reach deeper into a spiritual self, connect various parts of your brain. And then there's posture and movement and everything else, breathing, linked in. I think that's a very, very powerful point. I like the point about how elders, even with conditions like dementia, reach out with enthusiasm for an activity like Mahjong. And I mean, we have the same thing in India. And I think worldwide also we come across so many examples of people running dance as therapy, for example, for elders, which also fulfills, it checks off the boxes of physical activity, socialization, coordination, and a certain amount of, connect with your partner. And I think all this can be tremendously helpful in terms of our brain health. Excellent points. Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to remind everyone listening to the program that you should put your questions into the Q&A because very soon we'll be opening to your questions. I just have one or two more questions to our experts before we open up. If you have an active interest in exercise and brain health, are there specific guidelines about which exercise one must do and how much is required for the preservation of brain health and cognition? I mean, my stroke friends talk about 10,000 steps, 15,000 steps, even 20,000 steps a day. But do you have very specific guidelines that we can all follow?
I think that's a great question. It's the $1 million question. How little can we do? Because we all have busy lives, and 10,000 steps takes up a lot of time. So there's been some more recent research because the 10,000 steps was based on a Japanese study, which wasn't really looking at those parameters. And then this came out and it was like, oh, you have to do 10,000 steps. I think there's been some recent studies showing that already with 5,500, you're good. You are already reducing your risk for heart disease. You're already probably, as a result, also reducing your risk for dementia. Now, anything less than 4,000 steps is sedentary. So if you have a phone, look at your phone. Have you done 5,000 steps? You're good. If you're not, you'd be surprised at, for instance, how many more steps you can get in being on the phone, having a conversation, and rather than sitting down, it's just walking around in your garden, and you'll rack up the steps. There's a lot of activity. I think one of the most important things is not staying sedentary too long. That's an independent issue where a lot of people spend way too much time sitting down, which is very unhealthy and associated with cardiovascular risk. Including diabetes, for instance. So what we should do is, if we find we've been sitting for about an hour, is get up and walk around a bit. Even if it's just for a couple of minutes, go and make yourself a cup of tea, go outside, have a chat. Don't sit for hours on end. So walking is really good. There's been some separate research finding that walking in blue areas, so around the sea, or walking in green areas is really beneficial. And Linda and I were talking a little bit about mindfulness, and I love to walk in the forest, listen to the birds, smell the change of the seasons, feel that squelching of the mud, and just be there for a moment, in that moment, there, right there, walking and just letting go of the stresses of everyday life. And I think one of the most important things here is that exercise shouldn't be stressful. You shouldn't be thinking, oh my God, I need to go to the gym and I need to go and run. That is not the way to do exercise. We need to enjoy it. I think the health benefits of doing exercise we enjoy is far greater. And there's been some work looking at immune systems and how that works, whether exercise benefits your immune system, benefits your heart function when you enjoy it. So finding something you like, whether that's by yourself or in a group, is very important. And there, of course, are the WHO guidelines, which suggest that we should either do 75 minutes a week of intense exercise. So if you can bear it, running at least 10 minutes a day till you get out of breath, or being a little bit more leisurely, walking a minimum of 20 minutes to 40 minutes a day. Get a pet. Dogs are good. Dogs lower your blood pressure, and you will have to go out because otherwise they destroy your house. So getting a pet is a good idea. I know my horrible dogs force me out in all weathers. And then there is, so we have this walking. We can also do gardening. You spend a lot of time walking, and gardening also allows you to do resistance exercise. So WHO also suggests we do a couple of sessions a week with resistance exercise, so working our muscles. And as I said, we have a program which was developed by people who specialize in exercise for older people at Loughborough University, and this is for free. It's available on our website. Look for Couch Potatoes for Cognition. And you can do these exercises with resistance bands. They cost a tenner. You can just buy them on the web. And they work all the core areas of your body. And what we found was that in people who are middle-aged, people who are old, with or without dementia, doing these exercises 2 to 3 times a week, and they take about 20 minutes in total with a bit of warming up of 5 minutes, improves memory on those tasks that are sensitive to dementia. So we can really do something in improving our brain health with these very simple steps. I think one of the problems is a lot of people I speak to who don't do exercise don't enjoy it. They feel they have to go to the gym. And there's almost like a little rebellion there, which makes you feel good. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to go. I'm going to be naughty and not go. We need to get away from that. You need to think, oh my goodness, I'm going to walk a bit. That's really enjoyable. I enjoyed that. Or I'm going to paddleboard a bit. You know, whatever it is that you like, I'm going to swim a bit. Whatever it is that gives you joy, do that.
Wonderful. So it's at least 5,000 steps a day is important. Where you walk may be as important as how much you walk. So if you can walk in nature, that's better. And including resistance exercises of some kind, either through resistance bands or through activities like gardening, is a good thing. And finally, it shouldn't be a chore. Don't get bored with it or do it because you have to. Enjoy it and do it with enthusiasm and joyfulness. Very good takeaways. Thank you. I think we're starting to have questions in the question box. I'm going to just do 2 more questions and then we'll go to the audience. Linda, I wanted to ask you about late life depression because it's a real problem across communities. And of course, now in COVID, with all the loneliness and the despair and the isolation, I think it's even more of a problem for a lot of people. And it also can be affected by brain health. So could you please draw out those links for us?
Yes, thank you. Late life depression is indeed an important problem. Of course, we have a lot of factors that would affect a person's mood state. Like if getting old, we usually expect that your physical mobility deteriorate a little bit, and you may be financially less stable. And your friends, when you get into advanced old age, some of the friends and close relatives may leave you forever. So this bereavement, adjustment, everything seems to be factors that may cause depression in old age. But something that we need to be attentive is that not all old age depression are related to aversive psychosocial stress. Many are, but actually there are some kind of depression which is actually affected by the suboptimal brain health. It's especially important to note that vascular diseases that affect small vessels in the brain, no matter whether they cause stroke, big infarct, or even small infarct, or even not yet have infarcts, if you have a small vessel disease in the brain, and you may have cognitive impairment, like what we usually call vascular dementia. But there is also something what we call vascular depression. People may have cognitive impairment, but even if when the cognitive impairment are not very obvious, you could still be depressed. Because the small vessel disease in the brain, especially the small infarcts, may disrupt the pathways and the neurocircuitry that regulate our mood and the cognitive function. So in the treatment of late life depression, not only do we aim to restore the mood regulating pathway function by giving drugs or even brain stimulation, exercise, all sorts of management strategies that may regulate, restore the mood regulating pathway function, we also need to observe that the medical conditions that affect the brain that may affect the cognition as well as affect the mood state. In the past, we used to think that middle-age depression actually have a high risk of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and vascular dementia when one gets older. But with more long-term studies, when we look at the trajectory of depression, if a person is depressed in midlife, but if the depression is well managed and bring in remission of the depression, the risk of subsequent dementia is not that high. So adequate management of depression throughout the lifespan actually is helpful to prevent dementia in the future.
Wonderful. So probably just to draw out the points there, that there are biological factors like poor blood supply in old age that can make you depressed. And of course, we all are aware of the range of psychosocial factors, especially loneliness, social isolation, limitation in activities. And many of my older friends and older patients also, they are losing people, their peer group. And I think that's the grief is also a huge contributing factor for them in terms of getting depressed. And I take your point that there are very close links between being depressed and losing your memory. That's important to remember, and also that if you have depression in middle age, treating it well will make sure you don't get, or it gives you a better chance of not getting memory problems in old age, which is, I think, a very important public health message in so many ways, that we need to catch it early and treat it. Thank you. If there's a lot of attention to specific diets, I'm in South India and we love our curries. But then, we are told, you must have the Mediterranean diet or the Mind diet, which is somewhat alien to my palate. Now, do tell us a bit about what we should be eating and what we should be drinking, because everyone I know asks me, I believe alcohol is good for my brain. How much can I drink? And so I think that's something a lot of people will want to know. Yeah.
I think this is probably one of the most commonly asked questions. Can I drink alcohol? And the guidelines are really complicated because recently several reports have come out suggesting that any alcohol is bad for your health. And in fact, there's been a big debate around this. There's been some studies showing that moderate alcohol intake, especially red wines, for instance, would be associated with protective effects against cardiovascular disease, against heart disease, perhaps against dementia. One of the difficulties, I think, is that what we find is often a cluster of behaviors. So we find people who are well off, who engage in exercise, they're not tired because of their jobs that are very monotonous. You know, they have time to exercise, they have time and money to buy good diet. And they typically ask these questions, so can I drink alcohol as well? Because they're very well informed, they already know what to do. What we found, though, in a recent commentary I wrote about these diets, the MIND diet, the Mediterranean diet, is that also people who have little education and low incomes can also really benefit from having a good diet. So what's a good diet? Well, a good diet is, and I mentioned that earlier, is folate. For instance, folate is very important. It's found in green leafy vegetables, and oranges contain quite a bit of folate. But folate goes out of food very quickly. So you need to be careful if you prepare it. So eating, for instance, spinach salads is better than eating boiled spinach, where most of the folate will leave. Then, of course, all the antioxidants, C, A, E possibly. But taking supplements for these has generally not been associated with better cognitive function. So just having a varied diet, I taught my daughter, eat 5 vegetables of different colors and fruits every day, especially the vegetables are very good. And she would count that on her fingers and she'd go, Mommy, we've only had 4 today. We need to have something else, which is a really nice way of playing a little game and getting children to eat these vegetables and fruits. Different colors are good, especially purple colored vegetables and fruits, very good for you, white colored vegetables and fruits. And of course the green leafy ones, the orange ones, the red ones, etc. Now then, in the Mediterranean diet, we also find fatty fish, and very important, lots and lots of olive oil. And olive oil contains something called oleocanthal, and that lowers your blood pressure when it's given together with green leafy vegetables. It comes up with nitrosamines, and that lowers the blood pressure. But oleocanthal by itself can also have beneficial effects on protecting the brain. Lots of olive oil. You want to be eating nuts, like the fatty fish, especially walnuts, contain quite a lot of omega-3, which can protect the brain. So it's very important what type of fats we're eating. We don't want to be eating too much meat, because that contains saturated fats. It's very bad for us. It's associated with heart disease and with dementia. So we want to be eating very little meat, especially red meat is not very good. A vegetarian diet is very good. In the Indian diet, wonderful components are turmeric. We don't know yet how protective that is. There's been some anecdotal studies showing that, certainly animal studies show that curcumin in the turmeric is protective for brain health. And if we'd eat that together in a dal with the lentils, lentils contain lots of folate. A cup of lentils contains 90% of your folate. So it's a superfood, especially with garlic and the ginger, which are very potent antioxidants together. It's a really, really good food. So depending on where you are, I've been looking recently at fermented foods. We now know a lot more about gut health, which is very important for your immune function. We heard a lot about eating good diets and preventing COVID infection, preventing severity of COVID, but it's also very good for your brain. We are increasingly recognizing that inflammatory factors, which are also produced around the fat in your tummy, are very bad for your brain. So what we want to do is keep our guts healthy. We can do that in 2 ways. We can take prebiotics and probiotics. The prebiotics are a little bit underestimated, and those are fibrous foods. So if you eat lots of vegetables, and you don't cook them to death, you'll have lots of fibers in it. Your guts love them, and the bacteria need the fibers. Eating multi-grain is really good. So rather than eating white rice, eating brown rice, the guts just love it. They're kept busy, and they're helping the good bacteria in your gut. And then the probiotics in many cultures. I don't know about India, Chris. I was going to ask you this. Do you have fermented vegetables? Like in Indonesia, we have the fermented vegetables. We have the sauerkraut in Germany. And obviously, these are ways of preserving the vegetables. But in the fermentation, we're producing really good bacteria for our guts. And around the world, we also have these fermented dairy products. Like we have Carnamilk, which is very similar to kefir. We have the yogurts in India, for instance, right? And your lassi, which would contain fermented bacteria. And these are super good. They really help your gut. So I definitely recommend them. Maybe rather than the wine, which of course is also fermented, maybe drink lassi, because with alcohol, we don't quite know. It's probably a little bit once in a while is okay, but it's, as we all know, it's quite difficult with alcohol to just keep it at one. If you're having a lot of fun with your friends, you might go overboard. So these fermented drinks and foods are probably something we want to pay a little bit more attention to.
Wonderful. So 5 colors of vegetables, lots of things that increase your folate, green vegetables, pulses, turmeric, which we have lots of in India,
yes.
And fermented foods and fermented yogurt are your recommendations. I just wanted to give you an anecdote that Rob Friedland, in a recent talk about gut and the brain, he put up this bottle of something in India. It's an Ayurvedic preparation called Chyawanprash. And this is something which has, he said, look, it's got 52 ingredients. And, you know, a tablespoon of this will guarantee you diversity of diet. So, you know, I'm not advertising Chyawanprash, but that was his very interesting comment about something that we make and sell in India. And a lot of people believe in. So I'm going to now open to audience questions, and I'll let you guys decide who's going to take which question.
I saw the first question, I think is fascinating. Would you mind, Linda, if I talk about the exercise intensity? So the question is, how much intensity in the workout matters? So this again is clearly somebody who knows what they're talking about, because that is the current debate. Should we be doing these short exercises called the HIITs, the high intensity exercises? So for 7 minutes, you go all out. And, you know, with a little bit of rest in between, you go through a number of exercises, and they usually involve the whole body as hard as you can. So you're really out of breath. And you repeat that maybe, you know, well, as often as you can, 3 to 5 times maybe. Should we be doing that? And there is quite a lot of evidence to say, well, actually, if you don't have time, that's a really good way of regulating your blood sugar, which we know is bad for your brain, lowering the bad blood lipids, you know, reducing the heart rate, the basic heart rate. You know, it's very good. Increasing your lung capacity is very good. The judge is a little bit out there. I found a recent study where actually longer exercise, taking it a little bit more easy was better, because in some people with this high intensity exercise, and this is very controversial, you are creating a lot of oxidative stress as well. So you're challenging your body. Now, I've tried HIIT myself, and I can't keep it up. It just is too much pain. I'd much rather go for an hour walk in the forest and enjoy myself rather than pain myself. Now, at the same time, there's a lot to be said about challenging the body. There's been quite a lot of work with that, taking cold baths, you know, after sweating, which is done in many cultures. From Japan to the Inuit to Iceland, you know, where we have our saunas and our ice bath. I think it's good to challenge the body. The body likes to doesn't like to sit in room temperature for all the time. But again, that debate is very much out there. So that's a great question, but one I think we can't really answer at this point. Do what you can adhere to, I'd say. For me, it's not hit. If you can manage it, yes.
Thank you. The next question is from a young neuropsychiatrist, Srivatsa, who's asking, when you are looking at cognitive impairment secondary to something in the brain, like a tumor, and the patient's on multimodal therapy like physiotherapy, what is the recommended duration of cognitive exercises that can be done at home for such patients? So this is not obviously degenerative. This is secondary cognitive decline, secondary to other conditions.
The thing is, it's just my clinical impression. When we work with people who have dementia, we found 20 minutes of cognitive activities with a break is mostly acceptable. If we go for a cognitive training for an hour or 45 minutes, many of us will get tired. When you get tired, your mind just drifts around and the concentration is not optimal. And I guess if we want to do it at home, especially if it's at home and there are a lot of distractions, I would beg 20 minutes with a little break, and then if the patient is keen, you can have another 20 minutes, and that's more or less that one session should be like. And for the frequency, and we try, not for the young patients with neuropsychiatric problem, we actually try a different frequency of cognitive activities, low intensity cognitive activities in centers. If twice a week program probably is a little bit marginal. We did 3 times a week program. It seems that the cognitive function appears to improve much better. So it's just our experience in the local for the mild dementia patient. And I would like to try to attempt the third question as well.
Yes. Yes.
In terms of age of onset of dementia, generally speaking, if we have early onset, dementia can set in as early as late 30s, early 40s. But these are the special types of dementia, usually related to genes, like frontotemporal dementia, special types of vascular dementia, and early onset Alzheimer's disease. And the early onset cases account for about 2 to 3% of all dementia. They have onset before 65, but mostly from 40s to 50s. But they are not the significant proportion. These cases are unfortunate because of the gene loading. They progress much more quickly. For most of the cases, the onset age, peak onset age probably is after 70. And the multifactorial different types of reasons for that. So if we are talking about the common signs of dementia of the late onset type, and perhaps if a person compare with himself or herself, they really deteriorate compared to last year. There's a decline. So this is one of the most important telltale signs, because somebody function at a very high level, somebody function at a normal level, but if there is a drop, I think that would be the most important sign to look for.
And if I might add, I think one of the reasons we are having this discussion is also that the older you live, the greater your chances of developing some decline, which then becomes clinically significant as dementia. And that's the whole story of population aging and how that's linked to dementia in public health terms. The next question, do you think in the present COVID scenario, does it accelerate the effect of conditions like dementia and depression in the elderly? Does it make it worse?
I just did some research in this last year, actually, looking at the data, and the majority of the deaths were actually in people, COVID-related deaths, but also non-COVID-related deaths. All the excess death rate were in people with dementia. I think part of this is because people don't vocalize and haven't had as much attention for comorbidities. For instance, delirium is quite frequent in dementias, and is life-threatening. Is often not picked up because people think, oh, it's just somebody being a bit strange. But as Linda said, if somebody suddenly worsens, you might want to look if something else is going on. If somebody has dehydration, or if the medication has suddenly been changed. We need to look at that. If somebody suddenly gets way more confused, the cognition suddenly drops much more, and especially hallucinations are very common. So we see that people start seeing things that aren't there, bugs often, or things crawling around. If that happens, flag that up and see if there's something going on in somebody's life. Sometimes it's pain. And people with dementia can't vocalize that. Now, delirium is really a life-threatening morbidity. Shall I answer the next question about homosexuality?
I believe so. I believe so, yes.
So we did quite a lot of work with this in Oxford. Professor David Smith, very much at the time when I came to Oxford in the late 90s, suggested that homocysteine was a very important risk factor for dementia, together with Dr. Helge Reston. And what we found was that homocysteine did explain 13% extra of the variability in the data, of the variance in the data. But the problem is with homocysteine in its own right is associated with a lot of other risk factors. And you can treat it very easily. So you can treat it very easily with folate or folic acid and vitamin B12 and vitamin B6. Now you can increase homocysteine levels. There isn't a normal linear effect. There is a bit of a cutoff. So over 40 micromolars per liter, all of a sudden homocysteine starts becoming a risk for dementia. Homocysteine is also a risk for cardiovascular disease. So we can lower it either by taking supplements or by using the green leafy vegetables, the orange for your folate. For B12, as you say, B12 doesn't contribute as much to lowering of homocysteine as folate, but it does. And of course, you can also get an anemia if you have a B12 deficiency. But making sure you have a balanced diet with pulses together with rice, for instance, can offset that B12 deficiency. You might want to consider, if you're vegan, to take yeast supplements, which can offset the B12 deficiency. But there is no reason why you should have increased homocysteine. The other, because of your diet, but you do need to pay attention to making sure you get adequate folate and adequate B12 in. The other thing about homocysteine I wanted to add is why it's such a big risk factor, is that it's also associated with kidney disease, which can cause cognitive impairment, smoking, and a whole range of other cardiovascular disease risk factors. So in the data, the epidemiological data, it suggests that it's a very important risk factor. But the treatment studies, so I've looked a lot at treatment studies giving folic acid and B12, even in people who have a deficiency, so I've elevated homocysteine, we don't see that much of a change in cognitive performance. There have been a couple of studies by the Jager in Oxford, a couple of other studies, but there have equally been quite a number of studies which have not shown this difference. And the Oxford team said, well, that's because you need to look at this in conjunction with also having an omega-3 deficiency. So these might be people, for those people it really helps, looking at the combination of taking omega-3 and the supplements. For those people, that makes a huge difference. So these are people possibly who have a wider nutritional deficiency. If you're not nutritionally deficient, there's probably not that much point in taking folic acid or B12. I would save myself the money and just eat my 5 different colored vegetables and fruits to make sure, and the multi-grains, the yeast supplements if you're vegetarian or vegan. And otherwise, you can get quite a bit of B12 for your cheeses, your yogurts, your other dairy products.
So even if you're vegetarian or vegan, you have lots of options nutritionally to maintain your brain health.
Yes.
Thank you. The next question is going to, the answer will cause a lot of depression. It's about alcohol again. Regular, moderate use of alcohol, and what does that do for your brain health? And I'm opening it out to both of you.
I think from a psychiatrist's point of view, moderation should be measured by the units of alcohol that you should take. And we know that if it's beyond too much, then you have liver damage, and you have a lot of damage to your physical body and also to your brain, not only for the cognitive function, but also for the nervous system. And generally speaking, if a man consume not more than 2 units of alcohol per day, that would be considered as in moderation, and women probably half, because of tolerance, or the liver tolerance to the alcohol differs. And, but of course, if you have already had liver problem, like if you have already had fatty liver not related to alcohol, or if you have hepatitis, which is quite common, then moderation, the amount should be much reduced. And there have been some studies as to what type of wine that you can take. And then some people said that red wine, because of the antioxidant content in the more richer in the red wine, probably have some beneficial effect, but so long as it must be in moderation. And otherwise, we don't want to see the alcoholic encephalopathy and alcohol dementia setting in if you drink too much.
Thank you. Eve, would you like to add to that?
I think the judge really is out on that one, isn't it? Also with the red wine story, there have been some studies suggesting that, because there's resveratrol in the red wine, which is very beneficial in animal studies. But I think it brings us to something really important, is that a lot of the data are based on animal studies, and we don't really have a very good animal model to mimic what happens in the human brain. So lots of supplements, lots of treatments, like for instance estradiol in women has been found to be very beneficial for rodents, but we can't seem to get it work in the long term for women after menopause to improve brain health. We see effects for a couple of months, and then the effects reverse back to baseline, or even women even get worse. Older women can get worse on HRT. So it's very difficult to translate that data. And of course, as I said, people who drink wine are usually it's associated with certainly in the UK being middle class. You know, you have the money to buy it. It's quite expensive to buy a bottle of wine in the UK. So it's associated with a lifestyle of eating well, exercising, going on foreign holidays, so you get lots of vitamin D through sunshine. It's not living in polluted areas. It's being able to send your children to good schools with different activities, which set your children up again to have a reduced dementia risk. And so social deprivation is probably something that is very difficult to control for in data. I think a good diet can offset these effects and should really be promoted by governments. We need to certainly move away from the junk food culture, where there is very cheap, very high fat, high sugar, easily available food. We need to tax that to bits, because that is causing public epidemic in obesity, in diabetes, in heart disease, and is also associated with lower cognitive function. So that's what we need to move away from. how often can you eat junk food? I'd say if you eat a good diet, you don't want to eat junk food anymore because you can taste how crap it is. So, and it's quite addictive. There have been quite a lot of studies showing that that degree of fat and salt and sugar gives dopamine responses in the brain. People find it pleasurable, and they get quite addicted to eating this. So that is something I think is a far worse problem than should we drink 1 glass or 2 glasses. The problem lies in junk food.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Vanita how we're doing for time. Vanita, I think we've done the questions. We have a few more things to discuss, but I'm going to bow to you.
Another 10 minutes. We can go on if there are enough questions to take. I think we can go on for another 10 minutes.
Wonderful. I wanted to just pick your brains, Professor Hogerwast and Professor Lamb, on a few things. This is like what shall I say, a fast round, a snap round. So just one thing that we could do to prevent diabetes and its complications. What's the one thing we can do to prevent diabetes and its complications?
Well, I think the junk food is a big one. I think a lot of people underestimate how much sugar they eat in their daily diet, and sugar is quite an addictive substance. I find I don't like sugar. I've always been quite fortunate, but that's a really big one because, of course, in diabetes, your cells aren't able to take sugar in so much. You get resistant to insulin, so you feel hungry all the time. And you feel like you need to eat more, and you're getting bigger and bigger. And so this becomes, and becoming bigger makes you even more insulin resistant, makes you resistant to leptin, which is something that makes you say, hey, we've had enough now. So you get into this vicious circle where you're more and more, you're addicted to the food. So I think definitely reduce your sugars in your diet.
For us, probably because we have a very high prevalence of diabetes in Chinese population, in Asia actually, very extremely high prevalence of diabetes. And it appears that the body mass, you don't have to be very obese and you're still diabetic. The one thing that would reduce the risk or at least the complications, probably I would encourage a patient just move. Select a type of physical exercise that you enjoy, at least you don't hate, even for walking. Don't make sure that you don't hate walking, and try to walk at least half an hour after every meal. And that's one advice that we would like to offer to them. As simple as walk after every meal, as regular as possible, and then you would have a better blood sugar level.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What about hypertension? How do we prevent the impact of hypertension on brain health?
I think the same advice, isn't it? It's moving and making sure. Well, one of the other things, of course, is salt intake, which can contribute to that, which is often found in the pre-prepared foods. They have a high salt and sugar and fat content because we find it very difficult to stop eating. Nobody's ever binged on a bundle of salad. Nobody does that, but we do binge on crisps, on fries, on all the fatty, salty, sugary things, because it doesn't occur so much in nature. So our brain says when we come across it, it's like, go for it. You must eat this and don't stop. And it's very difficult to regulate it. So I think as Linda said, move and try to stay away from very high salty foods. We need a little bit of salt, obviously, but there's plenty of salt in the breads that we eat and your normal diet. And also I think chronic stress, we talked about that before, being mindful, taking time out. We live in a culture where we feel that we need to work all the time. We should get away from that. We need to take time for our families, pay attention to each other, pay attention to the things that matter, you know, and support each other. That's far more important than just working all the time, I think.
And one further comment is for those who have high blood pressure, don't wait and start the medication. Many of us, as I don't have any, I don't feel bad, I don't have any symptoms. It's just occasional increase in the blood pressure measurements, and I just feel anxious. So try not to take the medication. So my one further point is, sorry, don't wait till you got malignant hypertension. Don't wait that your blood pressure is shoot up to 200 over 120. Even the 140 and 90, get an early start. So then in the long run, you will benefit from just half a tablet or 1 tablet of medication if you really need it. We have many people, I would say it's a myth. Many of our patients, my patients, that they say once you take the first tablets of antihypertensive, you have to and do it for the rest of your life. I have to explain to them that it's not that the medication stick to your life, is that you need the medication. So long as your blood pressure is high, better try to adhere to the medication and don't let it go too wild in the end. So that's my thoughts.
And probably we should add smoking as a cause of hypertension. Very important. And I like the point about stress, because it's so important for both diabetes and hypertension to keep your stress under control. Cholesterol levels and why they're important for brain health, or keeping them under control, and why they're important for brain health.
Because for Alzheimer's disease, at least for us, we know Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, the lipid, abnormal lipid protein metabolism is related to the pathology. If you have high lipids, you have a high chance of having the pathology of Alzheimer's disease, and of course, you have a high chance of having vascular dementia. So it's very important to keep track of the lipid level. And we also need to know that not cholesterol are bad. If you do exercise, the good cholesterols would help to clear up the debris, the dirty things in your blood vessel. So just check the cholesterol level and be aware that whether it's a good cholesterol that is abnormal or the bad cholesterol that is abnormal. So we can be more sensitive and more aware of our own body in that respect.
The other thing I think is interesting about cholesterol is eating lots of fiber in your food. Not many people know that can really reduce cholesterol. So, for instance, eating a breakfast with oatmeal, you know, can really reduce cholesterol. Also, something weird like peanut butter, where you think it increases cholesterol, actually reduces cholesterol. So there's quite a lot of foods you could look at. Obviously, we should not be eating sausages and hamburgers and loads of red meat, because that is not going to be so good. But bizarrely enough, it's again the sugars which really increase the LDL cholesterol, much more so than the cholesterol in food, because that turnover is determined by your liver. But sugar can really give you spikes in LDL cholesterol. So again, no sugar, but instead fibers, stay away from too much meat, focus on the vegetables, the multigrains, because that can really help reduce your cholesterol. And of course, as Linda said, exercising, because that can reduce the bad cholesterol.
I think we've kind of almost run out of time. So final words of wisdom from you both.
I think in a couple of years' time, we'll be spending a lot more time talking about stress. I think stress is currently stress and a lack of sleep, and how that impacts on sleep and the restorative qualities of sleep. Having a good sleep, a deep sleep, waking up rested is so important. And I think in a couple of years, I hope sooner rather than later, we'll be spending a lot more time talking about the things Linda talked about, like having spending more time being mindful, less stressed, taking your time for things, experiencing life, because a lot of us just run around like headless chickens, trying to do as much as we possibly can, and that's not good for your heart or for your brain, and you'll end up being very lonely, and that isn't good for your brain either, because that increases the risk for dementia as well.
I was thinking along the same line. I was just to say is about mindful awareness. Mindfulness, be mindful, that means you're more aware of your own self, your way of living, what you eat, and do you move, do you sleep well, the same thing as what Eve mentioned, and do you go out with your friends. Mindfulness is not only talking about sitting, doing hours of meditation like the Indian guru. It is a minority group. Most of us, mindfulness means that you are more aware of your own body and your mind. If you know that you are stressed out, give yourself some time away from the stress, at least a little bit, a few hours, a few minutes every morning to keep up with a peaceful mind. So that would be very important stress reduction. And it's not only important for the mental health, but also for the brain and also for the physical body. A stressed out body is very susceptible to medical conditions as well.
Yes.
So before I hand us back to Vanita, I would just like to summarize that good cognitive health is about a good lifestyle. It's about being active. It's about being mindful and stress-free to the extent possible. It's about eating well and eating a diverse, healthy diet. It's about, I think, the one thing we didn't talk enough about is sleep. And I think increasingly we understand that sleep and sleep quality are very important determinants of good cognitive health. So it's about sleeping well. It's about preventing depression and working with it early. And I think it's about doing everything else in moderation. And I think, there are many, many ways to skin a cat, is what this talk has taught us. And I'm so happy also to learn that the Indian diet has so many things that we can use. And the Indian yoga has so many benefits, which Linda comes all the way from Hong Kong to enjoy. So thank you, both Eve and Linda, Professor Lam and Professor Hogewast, for a wonderful session. I'm going to pass you back on to Vanita. Once again, thank you to the CIC leaders for inviting us to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. ESK. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Eve. I mean, that was a very important conversation with so much happening all around, and especially with digital consumption and things like that. I'm so glad we chose this topic for discussion, and for which I think we must thank Dr. ESK, our program committee, and the members who asked to have such a program. So thanks everyone for taking the time out today and for enlightening us about various ways to remain mindful in today's world. Thank you and have a good evening, and thanks to our wonderful audience that joined. We will update you on the current programs. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.